I'll never forget the way my brother laughed at me in front of everyone, like my life's work was nothing more than a bad joke. At our father's funeral, with mourners still holding their breath in grief, he slung an arm around my shoulder and told a retired colonel, "Don't mind my sister. Her idea of service is fixing staplers." The chuckles that followed cut deeper than any insult I'd ever endured. My name is Veratus Monroe, and that moment didn't just sting, it carved open an old wound my family had kept alive for years. The quiet certainty that, in their eyes, I would always be the failure, the invisible one. The rain hadn't stopped all morning, a fine Puget Sound drizzle that seeped into everything, our coats, the stone steps of the church, even the lilies crowding the front pews. The air outside Queen Anne's small chapel carried that heavy mix of damp wool and funeral flowers. Inside, mourners shifted in their seats, umbrellas leaned against the wall, still dripping. The atmosphere hushed, except for the occasional cough or whisper of condolences. My mother, Eileen, sat rigid on the aisle, her gloved hands folded tight in her lap, her gaze never wavering from the polished casket, just a few feet away. My brother Caleb commanded the room as though it were his stage. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, he shook hands with practiced ease, flashing that broad salesman's smile. He slipped into stories about a new property deal in Bellevue, weaving his success into the solemn occasion without missing a beat. People nodded along, eager to please him, and he basked in it, as always. When a retired colonel, who had once served with my father, approached me quietly, his voice softened by grief, I thought for a moment I might finally be seen as more than a shadow. "Your father was proud of you," he said, his eyes searching mine with a sincerity that made my chest tighten. Before I could answer, Caleb swooped in, draping an arm around my shoulders, pulling me under his weight as if to remind the man, and me, exactly where I stood. "Don't mind my sister," Caleb said, his chuckle slick with condescension. "She does it work, calls it service, but really, she's more like the coffee girl." His words carried easily in the hushed air. A ripple of polite laughter spread through the group. The colonel's smile faltered, his brow creasing as though he knew something wasn't right, but he stayed silent. I forced a tight smile, the kind I'd mastered over years of being diminished, and felt the cold settle into my chest. The laughter around me rang louder than the church bells outside. I stood still, hiding the sting behind a mask I'd worn far too long. That night, when the house was quiet and the rain still beat against the windows, my phone lit up with Julia Rios's name. My attorney's voice was steady, almost surgical. She told me she had received a sealed envelope from the Department of the Air Force. "If Caleb pushes this, we'll use it," she said. "But you need to stay calm. This fight won't be like the ones at the dinner table." I sat in the dim light, the rhythm of the rain tapping steady on the glass, and knew with absolute certainty that the next battle wouldn't be fought over whispered family gossip. It would be decided in a courtroom. The lawyer's office in Pioneer Square felt heavy with its own history. Exposed brick walls, old oak shelves lined with thick binders, and a warm amber light spilling across the long wooden table where we all sat. My mother's black gloves rested neatly in her lap, her face tight with quiet expectation. Caleb lounged in his chair, cufflinks gleaming, smirking as though this reading of our father's will were just another business deal. The lawyer cleared his throat and began with the formalities. The estate was to be divided evenly, property and accounts split down the middle. Then he paused, adjusted his glasses, and read a final line written in our father's own hand. "I wish to acknowledge Veratus's quiet service." The words seemed to hang in the air. Caleb's hand shot out, snatching the papers before the lawyer could lower them to the table. "Service!" he barked, his voice sharp, almost mocking. He looked at me, eyes blazing with contempt. "What service? She made this up to get a bigger slice. Nothing but lies." Eileen shifted in her chair, her sigh heavy, her head shaking with disappointment. She turned her gaze to me, not with sympathy, but with a weary mix of shame and reproach, as though my father's final words were an embarrassment to her. The heat rose in my chest, but I didn't argue. Instead, I was pulled back into the silence of nights on duty, sitting in a locked room under humming fluorescent lights, headset pressing into my ears. Echo Ridge, stand by for Title 10. The command would come without warning. Screens filled with cascading green code, the smell of stale coffee clinging to the air, my heart pounding with the weight of knowing a single keystroke could protect or endanger lives. That was my service. A service no one at that table could ever imagine. Caleb slammed the will back onto the table and gave a cold laugh. I'll take this to court. Let's see how long your little fantasy holds up under oath. I sat frozen, staring at my father's handwriting. A single sentence, simple, almost tender, had ignited a storm. It didn't take long. The following week, Caleb filed his petition at King County Superior Court. The heavy packet of papers arrived at my attorney's office. The top page bold and accusatory. Stolen valor. My father's legacy had been reduced to an allegation of fraud, printed in black ink for the court to weigh. The first mediation session was held in a cramped conference room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and paper dust. Caleb leaned forward, theatrically smoothing the lapel of his suit before speaking. Her idea of service? He scoffed, pausing for effect. Resetting a modem. She conned our father while he was dying, pretending she was something she's not. I sat still, hands folded, every muscle in my face trained to give nothing away. Julia, poised beside me, leaned just close enough to whisper, "Let him keep talking. Every word is a gift. Every accusation will hang him." Behind him, my mother sat stiff-backed with other relatives clustered around, nodding as though each insult were gospel. The room was thick with the same smug certainty I had grown up drowning in. When the session adjourned for a short break, Julia and I stepped into the hallway. The air was cold, and my breath fogged instantly. She pulled me aside, lowering her voice to a tone even more deliberate. We're going to use CPA, Classified Information Procedures Act. Almost no one outside federal circles knows how it works. If it comes to it, the judge can review your record privately, under seal. But we need Caleb to keep digging his own hole. Let him— I looked back through the glass at my brother, laughing with his lawyer, as though the verdict were already his. The snow-damp air stung my lungs as I exhaled. Steady and cold. If he wanted to drag a family feud into a courtroom, I would bring the full weight of the government with me. A gray winter morning draped Seattle in fog as I crossed the West Seattle Bridge. Elliott Bay hidden beneath a sheet of white. The inside of my coat still carried the faint metallic tang of ozone, a smell that clung to me from countless nights locked in the server room. I pulled a long breath, bracing myself as the courthouse loomed ahead. The courtroom was as I remembered, paneled in dark wood, lit by sterile yellow lamps, the air thick with the damp musk of a building that had seen too many disputes. Caleb stood at the front, his suit crisp, his half-smile practiced, as if the outcome were already written in his favor. Victor Lawton rose with theatrical force. My client asserts Ms. Monroe has never served. There are no discharge papers, no VA card, nothing. His words echoed against the walls. I sat still, hands folded neatly, watching each line. The court reporter tapped into the record. Judge Meredith Hale leaned back in her chair, head tilted, her expression almost bored. Another family squabble wasting the docket. But inside my mind, the courtroom dissolved. I heard the clipped command in my headset from a year earlier. Echo Ridge, stand by for Title 10. The glow of screens, the chatter of code flooding in green, the clatter of keys under my fingers while we fought to keep Washington's water systems from collapsing under a cyber attack. That was my service. Invisible. Unspoken. A buzz jolted me back. My phone pulsed against my side. a discreet vibration. I glanced down. An encrypted text from a former teammate. Local blog just posted. Seattle woman fakes military service. Source points to family. My chest tightened. Caleb had launched his smear campaign. As I turned my eyes toward him, he met my gaze with a smug grin, basking in the whispers of reporters outside. Under my breath, I murmured, "You have no idea what you've stepped into." By the second day, the courtroom was noticeably fuller. A few reporters huddled in the back rows, pens poised. Outside, the headlines had spread. Stolen valor in Seattle? My brother sat straighter, soaking in the attention, as though it validated every insult he had ever thrown my way. Victor strode forward, voice booming. "We submit additional evidence. A letter from the VA stating Ms. Monroe never served." He handed it up as though it were a smoking gun. Judge Hale took it, flipped it open, her expression flat, unimpressed. Julia leaned close, her voice low and sharp. "The font's wrong. The stamp is blurred. That letter screams forgery." I said nothing. Behind us, Caleb stretched back, confidence radiating, his eyes shining. My mother allowed herself a faint, satisfied smile, as if the narrative she'd clung to all these years had finally been vindicated. Julia pressed her hand against mine briefly. "Don't worry. DOJ already sent us the sealed envelope. When the moment comes, only the judge will see it. That's the ace." The court clerk bent down to whisper something to Judge Hale. The words carried just enough for Julia and me to hear. The VA denial letter showed clear signs of falsification. A family feud was tipping toward potential federal crime. And then came the final blow of the day. Victor, pressing for drama. Read aloud. "Additionally, the will contains a sealed letter from the late Mr. Monroe, addressed directly to this court." All eyes turned to the dark green envelope, resting untouched in the evidence folder. I inhaled deeply, watching the rain streak down the tall courthouse windows. The sound of it was steady, relentless, like my resolve. If Caleb wanted to drag me into the light, then I would bring the full weight of the system down with me. By morning, the rain had sharpened into needles. I pushed through the doors of King County Superior Court, steam lifting off wet coats, the hallway thick with damp wood and press breath, cameras tilted toward me like a firing line. Victor went on the offensive the moment we sat. "Justice must be public. There's no basis for a closed proceeding." Julia rose, voice even. "We submit classified evidence under the authority of CIPE. Only the court may review it. It will not enter the public record." Caleb folded his arms, a smirk hooked at one corner. "If it's real, why hide it?" Judge Meredith Hale frowned as the bailiff handed up a sealed envelope stamped in red by the Department of Justice. She turned it in her hands, irritation puckering her forehead, until her eyes dropped to the line on the face. Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Her posture snapped upright. One palm settled over the seal, as if to keep the room from seeing what she had just understood. A reporter popped from the back row to catch a photo. "Sit down," the bailiff barked, plucking the camera away. The air thickened to a hush. Julia leaned toward me. "If she opens it at the bench," she whispered, "Caleb has no off-ramp." I looked across the aisle. He was still grinning. He didn't realize the institutional blade had already left its sheath. Caleb took the stand to the metronome of rain against the windows and penstrokes scratching the record. "Chin high," he declared. "My sister never served. She manipulated our father for money. This is stolen valor." Silence pooled. I drew a steady breath and kept mine. Julia stood. "Your Honor, we move to open the sealed envelope." Judge Hale cracked the wax. Her eyes swept the page. The color drained from her face, glasses slipping down the bridge of her nose. "Bailiff," she said, voice hard, "clear the courtroom. We proceed in camera under SEPA." The oak doors boomed shut like a verdict. In chambers, a second sealed letter, my father's, was opened. His tremored handwriting recalled the night's Veratus was called away, the tired but steady eyes she brought home. The clerk leaned in with a quiet report. The so-called VA denial bore clear signs of forgery. This wasn't merely probate anymore. Judge Hale turned to my brother. "Mr. Monroe, your sworn allegations trespass into a national security matter. U.S. Marshals will take your statement." Sweat beaded at his hairline. Our eyes met. His wide, mine calm. He looked for a bridge back. I let him see there wasn't one. The doors had been sealed, shutting out the murmurs of the press, leaving only the judge, the attorneys, the bailiff, and what remained of our family. The silence was suffocating, heavy like the charged air before a storm. Judge Hale's voice sliced through it, cold and deliberate. "This document confirms without ambiguity that Ms. Monroe's service falls under the jurisdiction of national security." She raised her gavel, tapping it once, sharp as a gunshot. "The fabricated evidence submitted by the petitioner will be handed over to the U.S. Marshals for criminal review." The words landed like hammer blows. Caleb froze where he stood, his trademark smirk shattering into something vacant, brittle. Victor scrambled to object, stammering, "Your Honor!" But Judge Hale cut him off, her tone clipped and icy. "Counselor, you do not want to position yourself against a federal order, do you?" I glanced at Caleb. The starch in his pristine shirt had wilted into damp creases, sweat spreading along his collar. His hands trembled against the polished wood of the witness box. Behind him, my mother's lips moved soundlessly before the whisper finally broke free. "Oh God, Caleb!" Her eyes were wide with panic, her son's downfall unraveling before her. The bailiff shifted, and then 2 marshals stepped forward with the quiet efficiency of men who had done this countless times. They didn't need to raise their voices. The power of their presence alone was enough. One of them gestured. "Sir, you'll need to come with us." Caleb turned toward me in desperation, his mask of superiority gone. His gaze searched mine with the naked fear of a boy caught in a lie too big to escape. For years, I had been the sister who absorbed the humiliation, who kept the family peace. Now he silently begged me to save him, to play that role one more time. I met his eyes, steady and unblinking, and gave the smallest shake of my head. No. Not this time. As I stepped into the open air of the courthouse steps, the cold Seattle wind slapped my face, cleansing, almost liberating. Behind me, the marshals guided Caleb into the back of a black, unmarked car. The door shut with a heavy thud, and just like that, the era of his unchecked power ended, snuffed out not by me, but by the very system he thought he could manipulate. The chambers felt like another world, quiet, windowed in rainlight, sealed away from the chaos of the courtroom. No cameras, no reporters, only Judge Hale, the attorneys, and the remaining family members who sat stiffly in their chairs. The air was solemn, the weight of finality pressing into every corner. Judge Hale adjusted her glasses and spoke with clipped precision. "The will stands as valid. The estate is to be divided equally. There are no grounds for contest." She slipped a thin envelope into the folder, my father's letter, now officially preserved as part of the record, a final acknowledgement in his own hand that could never be erased. Julia leaned close, her voice low, meant for me alone. "The real victory isn't the money. You've reclaimed your story." Across the room, my mother and the others sat hollow-eyed, still reeling from the implosion of Caleb's case. His absence was louder than his presence had ever been. Only the steady patter of rain against the tall windows filled the silence. When the papers were slid toward me, I signed my name with deliberate calm. The pen scratched across the page, the last line in a battle that had consumed so much. As I set it down, a quiet breath escaped me, a sigh not of relief, but of release. The fight was over. Yet in that silence, I could hear the chime of something beginning. Months later, I sat in a modest conference room at Camp Murray, my Air National Guard uniform pressed and straight, The flag hung quietly on the wall, sunlight spilling warm across the plain rows of chairs. The commander pinned a citation to my chest. His words measured, "For quiet and dedicated service in defense of national infrastructure." There was no applause, only the firm grip of handshakes and the steady recognition in the eyes of those who knew what it meant. My mind drifted to long nights at the keyboard, the glow of code on the screen, the hum of servers, the bitter taste of cold coffee. That had been my battlefield. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "Caleb is in trouble. Please, help your brother." I read it twice, then calmly blocked the number. The weight lifted. Later, by Elliott Bay, I watched the ferry slip into the dark, its horn rolling across the water. And I knew, true legacy wasn't carved into property lines or split accounts. It lived in the quiet respect earned by those who kept the country safe in silence,